Wasn't an, sorry, I was in an involved conversation with a colleague and I didn't hear the alert go off. So
It happens. I just figured I'd give you a nudge in case you'd fallen off your calendar. Christine was going to join us. I did send her a text just to make sure that same thing may have happened to her, but I haven't heard back from her. So I think we just talk about what we're going to talk about, and whatever happens, happens.
I can't hear you very well. Can you turn your mic up
Not
or
really.
get closer to your mic maybe? Oh, now I can't hear you at all.
Excuse me.
Kate? Oh, you're quiet. Okay. So the first, I think the first thing we had on the agenda was actually Kate's, if we can hear her. The salt on the roads. See if we can.
Something wrong with my volume controls.
I can hear you, but you're really quiet.
Yeah, I've got some construction noise outside of my office right now. It's making a bunch of noise, so it's difficult to hear.
Is that better at all?
Not much.
There's no volume thing on this.
It must be me because this happened yesterday also, but I'm not able to. I think that I've got some sound issues.
Hi,
Okay.
you guys.
Hey, how's it going, Christine?
Good. I'm sorry. I'm a little late coming, but thank you for letting me join in, listen in.
Can you guys hear me at all now?
Oh, I can hear you great now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whew, that's good. Okay, so we're going to talk about the salt on the roads. Would you like to do you have anything you'd like to share
Oh,
as a starting point?
sure. At the beginning of this year, after the storms, I was just noticing the piles and piles and piles of road salt everywhere. I also happened to engage with a webinar from the Isaac Walton League, and they have Salt Watch as a national program that they're maybe only a quadrant of the United States, where they actually collect citizen science readings on water quality before and after storms. So it just was on my mind. I actually penned a note to the supervisors about it, asking for their help within whatever boundaries they could, because I think this is an issue that touches on pretty much everything. The numbers, I wish I had the numbers in my brain. I'm sorry, I don't. But the parts per million numbers, salt numbers are just through the roof to the point where no living creature can subsist in streams when this stuff washes in there. So the one thing I did come away with from the webinar was that a small coffee mug, a little 12-ounce mug of salt is enough to do 10 square pieces of cement on a sidewalk. And that's that's the maximum someone should use. It's literally a piece here, a piece there. And so what we've got going on the roadways as well as in the private businesses is a huge ecological nightmare.
Did you say one, how much, what were those amounts? 10 squares?
Of sidewalk. Of sidewalk, like a typical sidewalk square.
So that's a 5 by 5 square.
Right. So whatever that square footage would be, one little 12-ounce coffee mug is all you need for that entire area.
That actually seems like a lot to me.
Well, I mean, it really should be just a piece here, a piece there.
Yeah.
And
when I think part of this, I wonder, is like the size of the salt, because the salt I see people using is like this big rock salt. And you put one of those pieces of rock salt down on a piece of snow or ice, it just like melts straight down in like a hole, like underneath of it. It doesn't spread out. You know,
it's also being used instead of shoveling. And that I think is the issue. And that's what I went in my letter also is I asked them specifically to make the ordinance that they have the power to make, which is that people clear the sidewalks. And it's not individuals as much as businesses. That stretch of road from the Rock Store to Albemarle High School, which I drive multiple times a day, that is almost all property management sidewalk. And maybe 1/10 of it had been cleared a week and a half after that first snow. So we've got elderly folks, we've got all the walkers to Albemarle High School that cannot get a bus. There's no bus for them. They must walk. And they're walking in the road. We got runners in the road. And God forbid you have a wheelchair. What do you do?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean-
that makes me angry.
Yeah, I mean, as a runner, I just don't, I mean, I don't even bother. I mean, I did when I was in college but I think, what was I gonna say? So I think a lot of this is sort of growing pains for Albemarle County. Charlottesville already has an ordinance.
Well, I gave them
requires-
Arlington's ordinance. I lived in Arlington for 18 years and we shoveled our elderly neighbors' sidewalks. We met our neighbors because of shoveling. I gave them the whole spiel and I said, here's the ordinance, make whatever changes you need and implement it. It even has a fee structure. I mean, it's but there is resistance. And, I saw that article about kids at CHS, some cleaning like snow crew that was like, please don't find, if you can't do the sidewalk, all you have to do is say, I'm physically incapable to do the sidewalk and the city will take care of it, or Arlington will. Like there are mechanisms in place for every single concern. And the rest of this is packaged around just having an ordinance, for gosh sakes.
Well, I mean, I think we should check, but I think Charlottesville has an ordinance.
They definitely do. I don't think it's as
So-
broad as it could be.
So, I mean, I think at a minimum, Albemarle should at least have the same ordinance that Charlottesville does. And I think a lot of this, there's a lot of ordinances that, as we've moved from a rural county to we've created this development area. And as the development area has become more developed, we've had to address things in terms of ordinances that we haven't had to deal with before, like unleashed dog, like dogs not on leashes, like noise, light pollution. I mean, there's a series of things that we've had to deal with as we urbanize that we were kind of laissez-faire about before. And
Well, I think that's right, Lonnie. I think that's a good point, is that Albemarle's urbanizing a lot and suburbanizing, and it needs to recognize the ways that it needs to start updating its policies so that they're more consistent with an urban environment, a closely, highly populated area rather than these rural roads. I wonder about does anybody know about salt alternatives? There's sand. I mean, I'm just reading off the web, but I've potassium, of course. I think they're using a potassium salt as opposed to a regular salt. No?
Well, no, I'm just saying it needs to be the least obtrusive environmental choice. And cleaning your sidewalks and throwing down sand, boom, done. It's a little messy, but
Right. Well, as far as the roads go, I mean, I think convincing them not to salt the road is probably not realistic, but I wonder if there's some alternative. I mean, reducing the salt would be great, but even using not salt, I mean, I don't know about the sugar beet, the idea of using sugar beet juice is
gets very quickly to pollution of other kinds. I mean, I understand people want that whole safety, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want thing, but there are plenty of situations I grew up in the Northeast, and if you're near a water source, human drinking water source, no road product is used. It's literally take your risk on the highway. And, so there's that whole mentality of just because you can doesn't mean you have to, and we have to be smarter.
I'm not in any way saying that we shouldn't reduce the salt as much as possible. What I'm talking about is alternatives to salt in general. I mean, there's sand, basically.
Well, they use that slurry stuff. What is that slurry stuff that they, the trucks spread? I'm not sure what that is. But then we also had hard, crusty sand. And I think they're two different products. So I don't know the extent of the differences they're using, but they're definitely using way too much.
well, and I think the thing to do would be would see if we can have a meeting with our local VDOT rep, whose name escapes me right now, if it's still the same guy.
Hey,
or
Lonnie,
so-
can you repeat? Sorry, I've
Oh.
got this, they're placing a water line outside of my office and I can't.
Oh, so we have a local VDOT rep. Is it Joel or something?
I don't think Joel's in that position anymore, but I can find out who it is.
Yeah, so it'd be nice to meet with a local, to have a meeting with a local VDOT rep. Maybe even like see if we can get Kim to get him to a Natural Heritage Committee meeting so we can discuss it in the full meeting.
Yeah, I think just knowing what the county's protocol is and what they're doing in general, and if there are these different things they're using in different areas, if there's a mix of some sort with sand, we should know about it before we comment, I would think. And then maybe we can inspire them to use minimizing salt, because of course this has a huge watershed implication, how much salt you use, as you say, Kate, that's, so we want to minimize the amount of salt. But I think, unfortunately, I don't know anything about the true nature of these other calcium, magnesium acetate. Christine, you're muted.
I see, I would send this in the chat, but I just emailed you the article that Michael Callahan wrote for the Piedmont Master Gardeners. So he did a bunch of research on that, and he wrote a nice article about alternatives and sort of, so I think that there are, and I think the from I got from him is, just applying less. And I think, Kate's point is that people understood that it really has a detrimental impact. I remember at Tandem at school, they just put buckets and buckets of salt down, and with the attitude more is better. But if you could just help people to understand, and then it was just dragged in through the buildings. So the buildings were covered with salt because they put so much down. And so it is really a matter of education and
I'm just a big rule person for things like this. It's simply the VDOT should not be making mistakes. The county should not be making mistakes. And then that education that filters throughout to individuals is obviously very important. But there are, we have to actually have some real rules that affect the larger entities or the businessmen. Like I actually I was at Whole Foods right before the rain, and walking into I was on this big kick. I just written this letter. I was just frustrated as all get out. And on the walkway down to the parking lot around the edge of the building, there was just piles and piles and piles of this stuff. And so I had a lovely talk with the manager. I said, hey, could you please send someone out to sweep this up? And he said, we contract that out. We don't even do that ourselves. So there absolutely could be a set of restrictions on businesses who are doing this to simply make them follow the best practices. It's not a big deal. Don't ever use it, but simply it has to be done within these boundaries. Simple.
Well, I wonder, once again, Dillon rules state, unless there's specifically a state enabling legislation that allows localities to constrain that, then I'm not sure that we would have the authority to do so. So, we'd have to find out. Now, we'd have to find out if there is enabling legislation that allow us to constrain something like that.
I doubt there is. Dillon always gets in the way of the good stuff.
Oh, it does.
Well, if we could reduce just the amount that the county is putting on the roads, that would be a huge amount. If we could get 50% less salt or something, that would be a big thing, because who knows how long this has been going on. So
I think that's mostly VDOT though. I don't think that's county. I think it's almost all VDOT. The other really quick bug to put in people's ears is everyone knows about the Flint water crisis. Part of that lead issue can absolutely be attributed to higher salt concentrations from winter road salt. So, people can think about this in that they have to think in that larger frame.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it sounds like there's two initial actionable items here that I would see. One is the common sense thing is to recommend that Albemarle pursue a shoveling ordinance. That seems like a common sense thing that could be proposed. Another thing would be I guess we could think of three things. Now, a second thing would be public education about salt and alternatives, right? So, and then then the third thing would be meeting with the VDOT rep to see if to discuss the issue, find out what they're doing now, find out if they have discussions about a salt diet and that sort of thing. Just
Mhm.
get the current state of things so we can have discussion about
Right.
what could be suggested. So I think I would start with those three things as a point of moving forward and go from there. Is everyone in agreement?
Yeah, I would just, I think for the shoveling ordinance that it really, I don't know how you guys feel, but it feels like that's something that pertains especially to those growth areas.
Correct.
That makes more sense that you're not upsetting people thinking, what do you mean I live out in the country? But
You don't have a sidewalk.
yeah. So yeah, sidewalks, exactly.
It's not an issue.
I'm trying to think of, there's a couple ordinances that have passed in recent years that sort of are very similar in terms of, this is something that, not one of my favorites, but one that happened a while back was a weed ordinance. Like Albemarle passed its own weed ordinance because it's something that developed areas tend to have. Now, I mean, we ended up making a comment on that to try and accommodate, to make sure that the county accommodated native plants. Personally, I'm not a big fan of weed ordinances, generally speaking, but I mean, it is an example of this sort of thing as something moves from a rural area to a sort of a developed area. And when they did that, they did specify it was only for the development area. So yeah.
And you guys, what do you think about, I feel like a lot of this is happening because of the management companies. And I think that that's true with so many other factors, whether it's the application of herbicides, pesticides, and managing landscapes in terms of what do they put in for replacement shrubbery. And I wonder if there's a way to communicate with the landscape companies, the management companies, and just like the Better Business Challenge, recognize those companies that took on some like green stewardship approaches. And like the Restaurant Association has like the Green Restaurants Association. Maybe there is some similar organization that certifies these management companies and has sort of a rubric of practices, sustainable practices or environmentally friendly practices.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, I
Lovely
will say
idea.
that I think like each subcommittee is like entitled to suggest to the Board of Supervisors one person for accommodation per year or something like that. Or I mean, it's possible that we could use that as a means of, we've only used that power once as a committee, I think. But it might be useful to call out some of the good guys, the good landscaping companies or good businesses that are practicing sustainability in our area as a means of like sort of highlighting what other people could be doing.
Yeah, I think this issue is really fairly similar to the using herbicides and such Roundup. I mean, it's, that's been something that's been used as maintenance, so they don't have to do the actual physical labor of removing weeds or something. They just spray. I mean, I've had some shocking meetings with actually universities where they just have whole areas that they just spray instead of actually weeding or doing whatever they want to remove the unwanted plant. So, I mean, this is sort of the similar. They're just, it's an easy way to reduce labor instead of having to plow things. But I think, there are places where salt is needed, but I'm interested in this article you sent, Christine. So I think maybe reading through this and then having a meeting with the VDOT and finding what they say. We need some people that actually do this to tell us what they're actually doing, because maybe real steps we could take to at least reduce the volume a lot, which would be great.
I just realized something, guys. So I do want to close this up, but I think we need to jump back to some things we should handle in our agenda before we started. So I was kind of overeager, maybe because I was jumping a little bit late, but do we have more comments on this topic before we move on?
We have some action items. I think we're good.
Okay, I realized we neglected to read the proclamation about the emergency declaration at the beginning of this. Does someone have that that language in front of us? Carolyn, maybe?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Oh,
I-
we neglected to
see, I'm
read
just-
the proclamation, the emergency proclamation about COVID at the beginning of the meeting. Does Carolyn or someone have that?
I think Carolyn might be going to get it. I mean, I'm sorry, Christine might be going to get a copy.
Oh,
She prepared,
Christine's
and I know she does have one from the other meetings.
I have it. I have it here. I can go
Oh,
ahead.
Carolyn's got it.
This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with ordinance number 20-A hyphen or parentheses 16, an ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during COVID-19 disaster. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting will be posted on the Albemarle County calendar when available. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Appreciate it. And the other thing was approval of minutes. Kate, did you have the minutes from the last meeting for our approval? Let me go back and look. I think we had all been emailed a copy of that.
Saying the minutes from the last subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, the minutes from last subcommittee meeting. Kate, did you email those out to us? I think you did.
He's on a phone call right now.
Oh, okay. Well, we can circle back to that. Okay, so I did have an item that I wanted to, we don't really have anything from the comprehensive plan right now. We did have, that was one of the things on our agenda. Water resources was another thing on our agenda, and I did get a note from Kim. And one of the things that she suggested that we could start discussions about was we could discuss the stream buffer overlay district, which will be one of the first recommendations that they'll be bringing back to the Board of Supervisors as something that as like I forget what you call it, a resolution of intent to pursue work on that, on developing that. And what Kim suggested was we could look at other localities, look at the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, and start putting together some research about, how such a stream buffer overlay district should work. And so, so I think that's something that we could start looking at now. I mean, as you know, my feeling is that we should try to align ourselves as closely as possible with the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah.
And the language of that. So I think the one I keep circling back to is Caroline County, because it is kind of a rural county, one of the few more rural counties of the Chesapeake Bay localities. But I think maybe if we could start dividing and conquering and looking at some of the different areas. One of the things that's very interesting about how some of these areas work is they are required to sort of map out what they call the resource protection areas and the resource management areas as part of the Chesapeake Bay Act. It seems like staff had some interesting responses as to why it did not want to why didn't want to use RMAs and RPAs, and why they're specifically going towards this approach. But I think to the degree that we can tailor what we're doing as closely as possible to that concept, the better.
Lonnie, can you give me a very brief overview of that rationale? Why would we not want to align in those ways?
Yeah. Give me a little moment. Um, see if I can.
Together, I thought I'm looking at our last minutes, we had taken a position on all the stream.
We
regulations.
did.
So what's going on now? We're revisiting those statements that we made in the last meeting?
What we did make some suggestions. Let's see, I'm trying to get it. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to find the comments that I was sent. Somehow. I can't find it. If I do find it, I'll look it up. But yeah, staff had some concerns about the way the language, like if we adopted I'm not sure that I agree with them, but they had some concerns about how those would play out if we adopted the exact language, that maybe it'd actually be less strict than in certain circumstances than we wanted. But in terms of what Kim has asked it to do, in terms of, so with the approach the county is looking at as more of a zoning approach, like we're creating a overlay district where certain things are required in terms of like the buffers are going to be required as like as a zoning, as opposed to strictly by the Chesapeake Bay Act, which is kind of a weird way to do it, but it's what they're looking at. So I mean, some of the things that I think would be important in this, I think our previous recommendations are certainly come into play with this. We've talked about 2 acres plus the development footprint of the, if there's a new building, it should include, if 2 acres plus the development footprint of that building should have to abide by any regulation. So that, in terms of ag properties that, if you have, even if a property's overall use is agricultural and they may otherwise be exempt from the buffers, they would still be required to perpetually maintain any buffers that would fall within that house footprint plus 2 acres. If that makes sense.
I'm not sure that it does make sense, but it might be. I'm sorry, I've got this sound happening on the side. I'm reading it right here. It's what we have before.
Let's see if I can still find. Yeah, I mean, we were wanting them to adopt. We were hoping they would adopt the Bay Act, and they basically, that's been shot down. There's no way they're gonna do that. They don't have the votes on the Board of Supervisors to do it.
Would it be helpful to look at what Kim had sent with where, and or do you want me to forward that to, or have you guys already seen it?
Oh, did she copy you on it too, Christine?
You did.
Yeah, if you could pull that up, that'd be great.
Just the recent attachment about the buffer overlay district?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at that already in front of me.
Okay.
Right.
Do you want me to, would it be helpful?
Yeah, go ahead and share. You can go ahead and just share your screen on that if you feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah, yeah, let me just get it up here. So that was the email, and then,
Oh, there, she actually has the attachment about it, so we can look. Yeah, so you see that it's a stream buffer overlay district within the zoning ordinance. So it's very different than how I'd be doing, how it's normally done.
so Kim was looking for examples of other places where this is the approach that they've taken.
I don't think we're going to find any localities where this is the approach they've taken. I don't think we're going to find that. I mean, I think we're going to find Chesapeake Bay localities where they have buffers and they have rules around their buffers that we could integrate into this overlay district that's being proposed. But I don't think we're going to find anyone doing this with zoning. This is kind of a novel thing they've come up with. One of the things that this would do, though, that I do support is that it would provide for perpetual retention and management of stream buffers. It's interesting that you see the first statement. Perpetual retention was required in Albemarle County's Water Protection Ordinance prior to 2014. And I guess the question I have is, why not just revert to what we had in 2014, which also required perpetual retention of buffers? Why? I mean,
Well, that's what I'm curious about is, I mean, you must have said it, and maybe because of the sound outside of my window, I couldn't hear it. I don't understand why the county isn't complying with the Chesapeake Bay Act and just going with that.
Well, it says here that the staff did not have clear guidance or the capacity to enforce it. I don't know.
I
I feel like
it's-
that hides a lot. I feel like that glosses over a lot of things that would answer all of our questions.
It does, and I'm not sure, making a zoning overlay district, does that solve the resource issues of having enough people to enforce it?
No.
I mean, if the major issue is having the funding and resources to enforce the ordinance, I mean, that doesn't necessarily solve that.
I think it's more logical to go with the larger, more substantiated legislation, simply because then you actually do have partner counties that you can look to for guidance on how they're doing it.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, I guess I'm still very confused as why we wouldn't just revert back to the 2014 language. But why would we not just?
Have we asked that specifically?
I feel like
It's a great,
has addressed it, you know, that, I mean, what she said to me is that this, and I'm sure there's a reason why. I don't know, I can't pull it off the, tip of my tongue here, but maybe, she needs to, I don't know enough about it to speak with any expertise, but I feel a certain amount of confidence that she really has examined it in a thorough way, but maybe we need to hear from, or you guys need to hear from her directly.
I think we do. I think we do need to hear specifically that question. Because the best I could say is that, I mean, I guess in terms of the enforcement, I mean, I think, obviously, I mean, citizens' complaints, if you have neighbors that say, hey, my neighbor just removed the buffer and they're, they're not supposed to be allowed to do that according to county ordinance, then that should be cause for the county to take action on it. What I've said before is worst first, is I think we need to involve the GIS team and use land cover data to actually get some good mapping of buffers so that we can analyze when those buffers disappear. Like we can see, from the sky, you can see there used to be a mile of buffers here and now they're gone.
I think that's a good point, Lonnie. It could be something where you could actually enforce that. I mean, if it's put into the county GIS, it will have a positive effect in anyone who's actually trying to think about changing the land, changing the land or developing the land or doing anything with the land. They'll look at that GIS. Generally, they will do that if it's of any scale. It doesn't mean that all kinds of random property owners that aren't necessarily developing can't just get rid of their buffer, and they'll only be called on it unless someone finds out or something like that. So I guess what you're talking about then is enforcement. How do you make sure that there's this overlay that's going all over the stream network that's in the county, and that actually exists rather than only a statement on paper?
I mean, the confusing thing is there already is in the Albemarle County GIS, the water protection ordinance buffer is already delineated in the GIS, right? What's not being done is any kind of analysis of like, there was buffer here last year and now there's not buffer. That's not happening.
So what you're talking about is enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an idea that, collectively we think that these are important for watershed protection and for wildlife migration. Lots of reasons to have these essentially greenways, these green fingers going through the county, and that we would recommend then some time devoted for the county to review an aerial plan with an overlay of the GIS, which those are already overlaid. Those are already two of the same, that the GIS system does have a photographic, and that's an interesting idea. I mean, that would have a potential benefit. And if that's not being done, that's not a way to win friends in the county, that's for sure, probably for a lot of homeowners, and property owners, but it's also a way of enforcing that.
I don't think we should be in the business of winning friends. That's what regulation is for, is protecting others. But wasn't there a discussion, Christine, wasn't there a discussion? I don't know if she's still here, but I thought there was a discussion that Christine, I remember specifically saying about a packet that maybe someone was helping to put together for staff and others to use when someone comes in to update a permit or build a new house.
Yeah, well, that was just an idea, right? This idea that could you provide people who were getting a building permit, that they had a list of best practices.
Yeah. But this could be included exactly in that, to say, this is the required relationship to buffers. This is why they're good. Don't mess it up.
Yeah.
I mean, currently, I think the part of our ordinance that works well is actually when there is a building permit. The problem is, and I have to give a lot of credit to the stormwater engineering folks that go out in there and do the inspections. They do a pretty decent job. The problem is once those permits have been approved, the home is built and they walk away. There's nothing currently, the way the county is currently enforcing this would stop the homeowner to be like, all right, all my stuff is approved, now clear the buffer.
So it's enforcement after the fact, after everything is set, that really is the gap, you think?
Yeah, I mean,
that's exactly what I just talked about, Lonnie, which is that the GIS does have a photographic underlay to it. I think you can do that already. You can turn both layers on, and that would be, I think that's what you're talking about, is just enforcing, looking at where there are huge gaps in the buffer right now. Right?
Yeah, and so some of the GIS people have insisted to me that either they don't have the technical expertise or don't know how to show the missing parts of buffers, or they say they need more granularity. I'm in doubt about this. I feel like there was a GIS person that the county used to have that's not there anymore.
Right.
They did this analysis. I wish I know Scott showed it to us one time. They took a length of stream and just did an analysis of the areas that were buffered versus unbuffered on that stream based upon
Yeah.
sort of rough calculation of GIS.
Was that an in-person presentation at a meeting?
It was.
Okay, I remember that.
Well, so that'd be a great project that'd be like a wonderful project for an undergraduate or someone, that'd be a great academic project, in some ways is we've got all these regulations, how much effect are they actually having? And looking at that, I mean, it seems like we could almost do that in this meeting, is turn on go to the Albemarle County GIS and turn it on and look. I mean, that's a matter of looking.
Well,
I
can I-
visually do it all the time, but I think what the thing would be to do is to do it in an automated way, so you can have the have the GIS itself. I mean, be able to do the calculation from GIS itself, like using Python.
Well, you're saying that there's something's reading the photograph. I mean, the photograph is not probably 100% accurate, but you could get a sense if there's a gross change in a buffer.
Yeah, I mean, generally the buffers are darker. I mean, you can, like, just visually looking at it, you can see visually the buffers are darker than unbuffered areas.
Right.
And then, and you can sort of write scripts that do that. Say, okay, well, let's strip out all the areas that are buffered. And now out of those areas that are buffered, show me all the areas that are lighter than X, right? So that's a scriptable thing that you can run.
Christine had something I thought she was going to add. Can we invite her to do that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought, it says in here that there $113,000 for a code compliance officer. And it sounds like the things you're listing is like what you'd want that compliance officer to do. Like look at the photographs or have developed some kind of computer program that can see what changes have happened over time. So like these are all recommendations, could be recommendations on how to enforce this ordinance over time. That's what you're talking about, right? To enable enforcement, because that's the first bullet point here.
Yes and no. I think the compliance officer would be the person that physically goes out, once there is something that's an enforceable action and they go out and enforce that thing. But someone's got to somehow how's the county made aware before it even gets to code compliance? I mean, how does the county even know there's a violation? I mean, the compliance officer is just the person that's going to go and enforce the ordinance, like, contact the landowner, say, hey, you're in violation, fix this.
Well, Lonnie, I think the way you know that there's a violation is just what you were talking about. It's either a computer program or it's a person physically turning on the GIS and turning on the photograph at the same time and looking at that and just looking over it and seeing, are there gross areas where there's obviously not a buffer in the buffered area.
Yeah, and that's where the worst first comes in, because I think if you're trying to do there's like a 2-acre parcel and maybe there's like a 10-foot stretch of missing buffer, you're just not going to catch that. I mean, there's no way you could accurately do that with GIS. But if you're talking about like 2 miles of missing buffer on a 500-acre property, like you can see that.
That's right. That's what I'm saying is the photograph is not, there's probably some warpage and it's not that accurate and also changes over time. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but you can see gross violations. If someone's timbered that whole area or put a whole paddock in, and cleared it, I think you can see that. I mean, I think it's a good suggestion. I think that's a great way, that first bullet point we can talk about. This would be a way that we would see funding some time for this, and it might have a real positive effect on the watershed. we could,
You kind of, it sounded like you kind of started to say something in terms of like a way to do this. Were you, I think you were, it's kind of, it sounded like you're about to suggest we should get a UVA student to, or a project to help us with this.
well, I was just thinking that would be an interesting academic project, which just, it wouldn't even have to be Albemarle, it could be almost anywhere, to see what is the actual real buffer in a county, the percentage of real buffer as opposed to what's supposed to be there, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got this whole Chesapeake Bay TMDL that's going on with the Clean Water Act, right? We've got all this pollution that's in the Chesapeake Bay, and it's reducing. But is it reducing because we got 50% compliance with a lot of the stormwater regulations that are out there, or there's actually much more compliance than we think, and the margin for increased benefit is only small? Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes absolute sense.
So, I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing. I could imagine a graduate student or an undergraduate analyzing the whole county, you know, just looking visually, or having a program that could analyze it, come up with how much of the buffer is actually being, is actually intact. And then you would, if it's only 50%, then that's a huge amount of benefit that could be had if we could enforce that other 50% being, created or maintained.
So I guess the question is, do we know, I mean, do any of us have any contacts, know any people in the environmental science department at UVA that we could pitch this to?
Well, or landscape architecture, that's kind of, that could be a landscape architecture, environmental science, that overlay right there. Planning is also that's where I used to teach a seminar there. That's the planning department is really, in some ways, would be a good one. I mean, GIS is a planning tool.
Yeah. So do you still know colleagues there that we could approach?
Yeah.
All right. So let's make that an action item.
So
To push
actually
this as,
contact a department about a study.
yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Like, just going back to what Kim originally was looking for from the committee, is like, are there other examples of this idea of enforcement over time? And what do other counties or communities do to try to make sure, the ordinance is there, and to make sure that over time, when somebody goes and logs or, cuts down a bunch of trees in the buffer, how do they keep track of that? I think she was looking for other examples of places, methodology that's already in place.
So I think one of the other things that's a lot of localities have, and I think this is in the Chesapeake Bay ordinance, I'll have to go back and look at it again, is that they have a committee of people that are tasked with evaluating complaints.
Well, that's an interesting thing. There was a professor who used to be in the landscape architecture department named Kathy Poole, who came up with I don't know if she came up with the term, but she was pushing it a lot, which is this idea of civic hydrology. And that, and of course, a lot of people are doing this already, but the idea that the community is deeply integrated and supportive of the watershed, and that there could be a committee that's watching out for the buffers or the watershed. I mean, the Ravenna conservation folks would be a likely group that would be interested in this.
But boy, it would be nice if you could do it just with looking at the photography, and if there was a way of doing an analysis of that. And I wonder if something like that exists already, and if it's being utilized.
I mean, in terms of like localities being savvy enough to do this already in Virginia, I'm sure it's being done somewhere.
Guys, just to note, it is 12:59.
Oh, okay.
Just to make one point about this, I actually think that maybe this first thing about enabling enforcement, maybe we should step back a second and look at, there's probably several ways to do this. We're talking about one of them is having a study done by an academic person, but that would be a good thing. And then there may be other ways. I mean, I think we might want to, I'm happy to contact someone about this, but we may want to get our thoughts together on this. about what's the best way to approach this. I think it's an area where there could be a big jump in positive watershed protection by doing something like what we're talking about, studying the GIS and the photography, area photography together. But I also think there are probably other things that we can think about with this.
I mean,
Is there a timeline on this, or can this conversation continue?
Oh, this conversation can definitely continue. And it sounds like we have some questions for Kim. I mean, the big question is, what if the 2014 ordinance was requiring perpetual buffers, why can't we revert to the 2014 ordinance?
Mhm.
I mean, it's kind of like you had a thing that was working. I mean, I know staff had some issues with it, but there seemed to be resource issues. Like they seemed to have, like, they didn't have enough people to enforce the ordinance, or they didn't have clear guidance to enforce the ordinance. But that's not, it seems like creating a zoning overlay district, some sort of novel tool, when you had something that was already there that was sort of an enforcement mechanism before that was working.
But was it working? It
Well,
doesn't sound like.
from my perspective, it was. I think.
And what made that more effective? I mean, what was effective about it? Was somebody following up and saying, oh, who was making sure that we didn't have changes over time?
Well, I mean, could it be more effective? Sure. But was it more effective than now? Yeah, in my opinion, absolutely yes. Because right now, you can't even make a citizen complaint about a buffer and have it enforced. Right. So back before 2014, I could, as a citizen, call up county staff and say, listen, my neighbor just stripped their buffer off. That's a violation of the ordinance. And they would follow, they did and would follow up on that. And I had instances where I made that complaint and it was followed up on and there was enforcement.
Well, I think so. One of the challenges sounds like it's funding enforcement, which is what seems to happen in a lot of municipalities and counties is with stormwater in general, is they don't have the capacity to enforce a lot of what they would like to do. It's quite expensive to go inspect biofilters, for example, and all the biofilters that are being designed out there and installed. It seems to me that this overlay study is actually might be a really efficient way and not take a lot of time to get a sense of what's happening with the existing condition. And that might be something we might look into a little bit more and see how much work it is, or is it being done by other counties, other municipalities. And it might be something that they could fund and they could see enforcing. So this might be a way of finding a way that could lead to good enforcement, because you also don't have to have a neighbor reporting a neighbor. It's just the county.
It's not ideal.
I have to go. I'm really interested in this, but it's after 1 and I have to go. So I don't know if we might continue this another time. I also think we might have to let Carolyn go.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds good. It sounds like we have some action items here. Some questions for Kim. Kennan's going to follow up and see if there's any university colleagues that we could collaborate with us on. And we will bring this discussion up with Kim at the next meeting. Some of our questions. With that, Kate, can we count on you once again to bring the minutes back for this meeting?
Yeah, I've got some notes. I'll sketch something out and send that out and see if it sounds reasonable.
And we can add in, so you don't have to do too much work. We'll add in what we have and we'll.
Great. That would be fabulous. I'll put some stuff in together. I'll send it out and you guys add. That would be my major preference.
Okay, exactly. All right.
Thanks for letting me join in.
Glad to have you here. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, thanks,
Bye, everybody.
Carolyn.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.